Hello, I'm Colin Green and you are listening to Spike Pit. Apparently, episode 81. I thought I'd done more, but seemingly I've messed up my numbering and officially it's 81. So, Happy New Year! So, Christmas has come and gone. We're into 2019 and I've kind of started off a little bit on a back foot. I've been away. I've been over to Norway to see a friend of mine and his family, staying in Oslo. Had a great time. Did a lot of walking and I'm still aching from trying to get around all the museums and just try and see as much as I could really. But if you've never been and you get a chance, Oslo's a really cool place, literally. Although whilst we were there, they were enjoying a little bit more of a mild spell, which for there, that's around -3 Celsius. So not too bad. Week before we went, it was about -10. So that would have been pretty cold. Anyway, so in this episode, I've got another instalment of Boardgame Brothers. It's part 2. It's just the ongoing conversation of me and Arfed chatting about our thoughts on board gaming in relation to RPGs, really. So without any further ado, let's get on with it.
We played Warhammer Fantasy Battle quite a few times. We collected the figures. I know you painted the figures. I painted them to some sort of standard. Yeah, it was different. It was a massive amount of time to set up a game, play for half the amount of time it seemed to take to set up, and used to take over the whole bedroom floor, and we used to just get carried away with how big the armies needed to be, and I don't think we had that much success in the early years playing Warhammer, and I'm not sure the rules were quite as good as they finally got to be.
No, first, second and third edition really we were scratching around, and we started to get White Dwarf, and I think it was really reading White Dwarf when they stopped putting in the role-playing games. They brought out Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. It didn't seem like that was in there for that long before they stopped doing D&D and their other games, and then they were more or less concentrating on their own games, and eventually they just went to 40k and Fantasy Battle, and all the role-playing games and other games were out of there.
So yeah, they definitely went away from the board game side of things.
Looking at the timeline, it probably coincided with the rise of the fighting fantasy books. I know Steve Jackson and Ian Livingstone were kind of turning their attentions to that. Games Workshop moved out of London and went to Nottingham, and they were concentrating on miniatures production because that was where the money was. That was when I think they decided probably role-playing games weren't worth their while, and you know, we're getting into the satanic panic. Its impact on, well, certainly on my role-playing, and by default yours. A good part of the problem with the role-playing was my school group got shut down by the church, well, by parents of players in my group who took their advice from the local church, and I ended up not really being able to play with those guys, and it all fell around my ears to a certain extent. Then I think we probably had a bit of a break. It blew over to a certain extent, and then you had your own band of merry men, and I'd in the meantime met up with a bunch of guys who I hung around with after school. We had a little bit of a group and we were playing separate games, and then I think we did have a sort of I came back to playing in your group later on, didn't I?
Yeah, you joined us for at least a year or two before going off to university, which obviously put a stop to your role playing, and we carried on because obviously a couple of years after you, so yeah, I had a couple of more years of role playing with just my group from school, and then they went to university. I didn't go to university. We carried on for a little bit longer, then again it just came to a close. Everyone had sort of moved away, and the group just got split up and got smaller and smaller to the point where it just wasn't working out. People weren't able to make it, and it just phased out, and that's where it basically went on hold until a few years back.
But in the background, the wargaming carried on through, didn't it? Because we was in the wargaming club, and I'd still be playing Warhammer and stuff when I came back from uni on holiday, and we'd play battles in the holidays. So whilst we weren't doing the role playing games, we must have still been playing the Games Workshop stuff and the occasional Spacehulk, and because that Spacehulk and Blood Bowl, in fact, were two of the Games Workshop games that we would play when we were sort of saying, oh, there's not time for Warhammer, and you got the likes of Man of War and stuff like that as well.
Yeah, I think Blood Bowl was one of the earlier ones, because we had the first edition of it, which again was the cardboard cutouts.
Yep, standees.
Rather than the miniatures that you've got now. I think it was a third edition that we might have had, which was the one we probably played the most, and that's the one I've still sort of kept, I guess. I've still got the teams at home. I still love the game. I still think it's a good game. Would like to play that again if we get a chance, have a little campaign. But yeah, that was one game that we always used to play when we had a bit of time, because the Warhammer was just took too long, really.
And what we haven't mentioned, and people wouldn't realise, is that we had a whole room in our parents' house devoted to our gaming and painting and modelling type hobby, as it were. So we had a full 8 or 9 foot long table that was 5 foot wide. Even with everything on hand, it still took an age to set this stuff up.
Yeah, it was mainly the figures, just so many figures in their little blocks of 30, 40. With the greenskins, there used to be hundreds and hundreds of figures. It weren't so much of an issue with my dwarfs when I used to get them to the table, because they'd have probably half the amount of figures, so it would take a lot less time to set them up. But yeah, just taking a turn moving hundreds of figures just used to soak up the time. So we often wouldn't finish. We'd get to a conclusion where we thought it was going to go one way or the other, and we'd bring it to an end, and that would be a whole afternoon gone.
Talking of time, this is one of the things I think is a stumbling block with me getting back into role-playing games, was this perception that had set in my mind from early on that putting together a campaign and running RPGs was somehow something I was not going to be able to do anymore. When I had finished at university and I was working, I had a girlfriend, and eventually got married, having a family. In your mind, RPGs take up a big chunk of your time, building worlds, writing adventures and stuff like that. We were playing board games because there didn't seem to be any of that. It was you buy the game, once you've learned it, you unpack it, you play it that evening, you pack it away, and that was how it went.
I still feel like that to a certain degree. Still like my board games because they are quick and easy, and they fit in an evening without any sort of delays or preparation or anything like that. I know that in the old days you used to spend a lot of time creating your worlds and your drawing your maps and doing your towns and your NPCs. A lot of that is available now. You can download this sort of information, and you can almost get a ready built setting, or you can get your maps, you can get your NPCs. A lot of it can be done for you if you want a quick setup. Your random tables. A lot of this information wasn't out there, I don't think, in the old days, or wasn't as easy to get to without the internet. So you felt like you had to do all that work yourself, and I think that's what probably put you off to a certain degree with the amount of time it took. Yeah,
the internet has definitely made a massive difference. The availability of RPG materials is just immense now. There's nothing stopping you from. You could virtually spend every waking hour downloading and reading materials and never run out. It's being produced faster than you can consume it. But the other thing is you're exposed to new ideas and new thinking, and the systems and style of play to my mind, has changed. So this concept of the one shot and the kind of low prep rules light systems, they were not a thing in the past. That has been very influential on me, to the point where I don't need the board games in the way I thought I did.
There's a lot of people out there that play role-playing games that I think potentially don't really need to play role-playing games. They could be playing board games that have a similar sort of feel, or they get the same out of it. There's lots of board games out there that have that role-playing theme or continuation from game to game, legacy games, things like that. I think there's quite a few role players that don't really take part in the role-playing bit. They're just there to throw their spells and roll their dice and kill stuff and get the treasure. And you can do that with a lot of board games. Likewise, there's a lot of board gamers out there that are trying to get that role-playing feel from a board game, when they should really probably get back to the role-playing table and get the same experience, if not more, from the role-playing. So I think there's people in the wrong camp on both sides, probably.
Well, I think that was me. I'm definitely the latter one of those. I was playing board games looking for a role-playing game that I could fit into an evening's play without prep. You got to get into the hobby now to realise that things have moved on. The D&D I used to play is not the D&D that I now play. Obviously there's aspects of it that are still there, but my whole style of prep and running a game is just totally different. To the point where it's actually easier for me now to run a role-playing game than to learn a new board game.
Yeah, I mean, it's a different way or outlook on it, I think, because it's probably the opposite for me. Because of the way I GM or DM when I'm doing Dungeons and Dragons or whatever system it is, I feel that I need all the preparation to support me to be able to provide a good gaming experience. Whereas I find it quite easy to learn and teach board games. That's something that I tend to do more in our family and friends sort of circle. I tend to be the person that buys the board games and introduces them to the group, learns the rules and things, where it's probably the other way around for the role-playing. You're the one that buys the role-playing games and looks up the new mechanics and works out the systems and introduces them to our group. So it's obviously a slightly different way of looking at it, or just the thought process, or we both bring different things to the party in that sense, I guess.
So, loyal listeners, I hope this episode finds you in good spirits and in good health. I've got a few more of these Boardgame Brothers to release, and I'm going to try and speed up the release schedule so we can get on with some new stuff. I've got some ideas, fresh ideas for this fresh new year, and going to take it from there. So, without any further ado, I'm going to head out now, leave you with a message from a good friend of mine.
May your days be merry and bright, and may all your Christmases be white. Man, being compared to Bing Crosby and David Bowie, I'll take it. Merry Christmas, and hope it's going to be a happy new year for you, Colin.